To the hour. My name is Peter Stock again, and I lead the Homeschool Legal Defense Association in Canada. And our job at HSLDA Canada is very similar to the Pestalozzi Trust. We are a membership-based organization. We defend families who are challenged in some way by generally a government agency of some sort, anything from school boards to social workers, all the way up to any sort of challenge they may face. And that's a job we've been doing for 34 years now. It's a little older than Pestalozzi Trust. It's very much the reason it brings me to South Africa, because we want to share what we know, we want to learn from what you know, and together we're stronger together. So. Today with me on the panel, there are two folks who are joining us virtually. They're not here sitting beside me, but you'll see them. Kevin Bowden is an attorney, a lawyer with HSLDA USA, and he has responsibility for serving families in 12 states of the United States. And then Juliet English, who's joining us from England, and you'll recognize the accent when you hear it. Juliet leads an organization called Learn Free in England, and she has helped hundreds of homeschooling families over the years navigate the system there and serve their children well. So, and both Kevin and Juliet have large families that they've homeschooled right from the beginning, and it will be exciting to hear from them about their experience and what they think about freedom in our world. Now, the reason the three of us have been chosen for this panel, and it's alluded to in the biographies you've seen, is that all three of us serve, along with Karen and some others, on the Global Home Education Exchange. And so the Global Home Education Exchange is a network of homeschool leaders from literally around the world, and we get together in person on a reasonably regular basis to hold conferences and, again, to learn from one another. So I'm glad to be here to share with you, and I hope that our experience in Canada, Kevin's experience in the US, Juliet's experience in England, and what we've seen in some other places around the world can be a benefit and an encouragement to you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Canada first, and then we'll hear from Juliet next, and then from Kevin. So what did I want to share with you about Canada? Well, first of all, we're talking about freedom here. So first of all, Canada reached a point in 2017 where home education was recognized as a legal decision by parents in all 10 provinces and all 3 territories. The last province to recognize it in 2017 was Quebec. And since that time, we've had, I would say, relative peace on the legal front in Canada when it comes to the question of, can you home educate? Now, that's on a broad basis, but on an individual basis, as an organization, we're busier than ever defending families who face legal challenges. School boards, social workers, and others either don't understand the law or they don't respect it. And so our lawyers are very busy. But I would still say we have real freedom in Canada. However, COVID came along, as we all know, and it changed a lot of things. And some of the things that changed were the attitudes that Canadian citizens had towards home education. So many parents, for the first time, had their kids at home, and they got to, and there was distance learning that happened at that point in time. So teachers were still teaching from the public system, but they were doing it online, and children were sitting in front of a screen for many hours of a day trying to learn, and it wasn't very effective. And parents got to see what their kids were learning, and they weren't happy about that. There were also another smaller group of families that had been thinking about home educating for many years, and COVID kind of pushed them over the edge. Maybe they were out of a job, or maybe they had to stay home, and they said, and my kids are home anyway, maybe this is my opportunity to try it out. So we actually saw a rough doubling of the number of homeschoolers, real homeschoolers in Canada, those who decided to take it on themselves and do real parent-directed, parent-led learning. And we saw most of those parents and families stick with it after COVID was gone and after the mandates were gone. And what did they tell us? We surveyed our members who were new within that period and said, tell us about it. Tell us about your experience. What did you learn? What did you see? And most of them said, you know what, I wasn't necessarily intending to continue with this. I was just going to do it for a few months or until the schools were back, and then I was going to send my kids back. I was just going to experiment with it. But here's what they found. They said, we found our kids, first of all, their anxiety levels dropped tremendously. Then we also saw our kids excel academically. They'd been lagging in certain areas, they had weaknesses in certain areas. Suddenly they were caught up and they were ahead, they were advanced compared to where they'd been before, quite dramatically. And the third thing they said, and homeschoolers who are listening will appreciate this, they found they really enjoyed the time they had with their family. So that was exciting. Okay, so we've seen, again, a rough doubling of the number of homeschooling families in Canada. We estimate there are about 200,000 children being home educated in our country at this time. So we're excited about that, and that's a great thing. But there's a problem that comes with success. The growth is wonderful, but the growth attracts attention. So I think there are two basic opponents to home education. I was just saying this to Professor Mello a few minutes ago. I think there are two basic opponents when it comes to the right to home educate, the right to choose home education. One is financial interests, and the other is ideological interests. So on the financial side, in Canada, and I've translated this into Rand for the benefit of the audience, but the average student, I should explain the system. So in most provinces in Canada, and this is also the case with in many other places, there is a grant from the Ministry of Education that follows a student. So if they go to a public school, the school gets about 130,000 Rand a year per student for operating costs. It's a lot of money, isn't it? So if a family decides we're withdrawing our 3 children from the system, well, that amount of money is enough to pay a teacher's salary. So you can see how this would affect the school's view, the public school's view of home education. Financially, suddenly they're out significantly in their budget, and they don't like that. So there's an impulse on their part to try persuasion or even coercion to try and get those kids back in the system, not for the kids' sake, but for the grant, right? So that's the financial side of things. The ideological side of it is perhaps more sinister, and that is folks who have an agenda and want to see it pushed in society and recognize that they may not be able to convince you of their agenda, but if they can convince young children of that agenda, then 20 years from now, that will be society, right? I think we all understand that. And sadly, despite the fact that homeschooling is legal, there are still politicians, there are still others who, for ideological reasons, want to see things change. And so we fight that at the political level, we fight that in the legislatures. So that's a very real concern. And as governments change, and as people in positions of authority change, we can face very real challenges. I think I'll just mention this, and then we'll turn to Juliet next. We have 2 interests. I have 2 interests, and we have 2 interests as an organization in participating and sharing at the global level. The first is because simply we care. We care to see homeschool freedom. We think homeschooling is a wonderful thing, and for families who want to do it, no matter where they live in the world, we would love for them to have that freedom. So that's number one. And hopefully we all appreciate that type of altruism, and I think the Pestalozzi Trust takes the same attitude, and that's a good thing. But the other thing is, what happens in other places does affect us. So really, really good example of this in Canada is that one province in particular, because of its historical linkages and its history, Quebec, does look to France for inspiration, for direction, for a sense of culture, and so on. And so they tend to mimic many of the things they see the nation of France doing. And this is reflected in the law. This is reflected in policies. And so when France decides it's going to severely restrict home education, political leaders in Quebec look at that and say, perhaps we should do the same thing. Okay, so what happens in other countries, we're not immune to it. It does affect us. If it can happen there, it can happen where we live. So we care for that reason too. Well, that's where we are with freedom. We're grateful, we're thankful, we feel blessed in Canada. It's not perfect. There's some real challenges, but it is possible to home educate, and so that is a good thing. Well, I'm going to ask if the folks at the control booth can bring Juliet up, and I'll ask Juliet to make her presentation. Again, Juliet is I believe she's in Coventry in England, and welcome, Juliet, when you can join us. There she is.
Yes, ja, goeiemiddag almal. Dis bly om julle almal te sien. Anyway, thank you for having me join you. I'm going to share my screen. I've got a few slides so it helps me focus and keep things moving along. So just bear with me. I'm going to bring that up. I need to make sure I go there now and present it there. So I am speaking a little bit on a UK perspective. And I think in some ways I have been uniquely equipped to have this perspective. Having come from South Africa ourselves, we moved over in 2007 after home educating in South Africa as well from 1998. And we have 7 children. They were aged from 20 months up to 18 years when we arrived. And we've been here a long time now, and we now have a few grandchildren. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that I noticed coming as a South African who'd been home educating in South Africa, where we were actually influenced quite substantially by American sort of homeschooling approach, and then coming to the UK, which is vastly different. So some of the things I noticed is that people in the UK seem to have a much greater dependence on the state. They were used to the sort of welfare system and being able to look to the state to provide for them. But I also noticed that people had more access to political process. So you could get involved, you could be speaking in parliament and that kind of thing. It just seemed to be that much closer than what it had felt like in South Africa. There's this strange tension between conforming and not conforming. So while you have a lot of people who kowtow to the state and to regulations and don't like to rock the boat, they all like to behave the same way, go on holiday to the same places, that kind of thing. You've also got quite a lot of people who won't conform at all, and these people tend to be on the fringe, and they will often get labeled and grouped in, and basically what we would call othering. They get regarded in a certain ways as not being quite with it and conforming. So there's increased regulations in this country, which brings order, I suppose. And then we have this focus on the citizens as being the drivers of the economy. There's a big push on school in the early years. So children in the UK start school in the year they turn 5. Some of them are still 4 years old when they start school and barely out of nappies. There's very long school days. They start early. They're in school till about 3:30 in the afternoon. There's very little time for play and childhood. The school is seen as a provider of childcare so that parents can go out to work. I also noticed a very condescending attitude towards parents where you weren't taken seriously. And I mean, that really annoyed me because I think South Africans know we don't like to be told what to do very much, or don't. I certainly didn't like people acting as if they knew more than I did as the mother of my children. And the other thing is that it's very expensive in the UK. And these are some of the impacts of these things. So if you look to the state as a provider, you stop looking to yourself, you stop taking responsibility. Being able to engage well with politicians, we can influence. Your fringe, if you're not conforming, you're marginalized. There's prejudice and discrimination against you. Regulation brings more order, but it also limits freedom. There's a push to get parents back to work as soon as possible. So childcare, they try and do what they call wraparound childcare in this country. Parents are being discouraged to be with their children in early years. So they're trying to give government funding for children to go into childcare from 9 months old. Um, there's a very severe impact of the long school days on childhood and mental health. The young people in the UK have been found to be the least happy in Europe out of 26 countries. And there's a very good reason for this. And South African families who've moved over, I know certainly they notice a difference in their children. And having known that freedom in South Africa that children do, um, it I can see the impact here of those that focus on this being indoors so much of the time. So the parents' views are not regarded as being of importance, and it's very hard to live on a single income and enjoy lots of activities. So as a home educating parent, that can be really hard. But our laws are pretty good up till now. That they hold a fine balance between parent and state, and the parent is actually responsible for the child's education. Um, but the government or the local authority will offer education. So this has meant a really free environment up till now. But coming into this country, these are just some of the things and the initiatives I've been involved in because of seeing how parents needed support to be empowered, how parents needed to be encouraged to know the law and speak out in confidence, be confident in their home education. So that has given birth in me a need to just really educate and equip and encourage parents um, to be bold and free educators of their children. So the Learn Free conference is something I run every year, and then I have another number of these initiatives that I'm involved in. And politically, I'm now very active in this country as well. So our current challenge is the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill. This comes after constant challenges from about, so 2009, we had a challenge, then we managed to get a bit of a breather. And then 2016, sorry, started again. And then we've had repeated attempts, government consultations, calls for evidence, all these kinds of political tools to try and uh, see how they can bring in greater interference with home educating families. And the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill has us very worried because we have a Labour majority and this is a Labour bill. And only the very bravest of MPs are speaking out against it. And the Children's Wellbeing at Schools Bill, what it will do is it has human rights breaches. So it breaches Article 8 of the right to privacy of your home and your correspondence. Um, it will also lower the data sharing threshold. So in the past, to share data, you could only share data without consent if the child was at risk of significant harm. They're lowering that to be able to share without consent to promote the welfare and education of children. So it's a really low threshold and very open to interpretation. It also will allow tracking of children through a unique identifying number, which most of us very independent-minded home educators are opposed to. And then there's also been lack of proper consultation. So they haven't really consulted with home educators. They haven't had followed any proper procedure. Even their impact assessment, they haven't checked to see what the true impact is. Is my screen showing okay? Because it's coming up weird for me. It might just be my computer. It's showing okay for you guys, yeah? Okay, so this campaign, we currently have this campaign on, and one of the things I wanted to speak about is that we know that often these changes to law, they come out of ideological battles, they come out of political agendas, and often there are people behind the scenes who are whispering in the ears of politicians, such as in the UK, it's the Humanist Society or the Secular Society. And so our campaign that we decided on was to identify one of the root issues, which is that the government are not listening. And it's not just home educators they're not listening to. They're not listening to the parents of special educational needs. They're not listening to teachers. They're not listening to rights campaigners. There's just a huge group of people that they basically are When you say, you don't want to poke the bear, they're poking the bear in a big, big way. And so we're trying to rally together with other groups under one name. So it's not a specifically home education focused campaign. It's about Are You Listening Now? And that's our hashtag. And we are collecting children's stories from schools where they've had difficulty in schools and how that's not been heard. We are collecting the stories of home educated young people. And we're looking at how can we get all these stories together so we can send our MPs to go and look at them. Um, One of the big arguments we find that politicians use is that it can't be just about the parents' rights. It has to be about the children's rights as well. And so I'm sharing, I've just put this little bit about promote the positive. We have to change the narrative. We have to change the way people talk about home education and talk about childhood. So we need to promote that and get those positive messages out as well as campaigning. And then I wanted to share this quote, which is it just really puts that argument about rights to bed. So this was a quote by somebody here in the UK who's been very involved with home education for many years. And he said, children have the right to parents, and parents can only be parents if they have the powers to act as parents, enabling them to carry out their duty. So parental rights are really children's rights. One cannot or should not be offset against the other. And so, we continue with this fight in this country to try and get our voices heard and the children's voices heard by standing together.
All right. Thank you, Juliet. And we'll now hear from Kevin Bowden. And Kevin's, I believe, going to be calling us from somewhere in Virginia, or perhaps West Virginia, depending where he is today. Again, Kevin's an attorney. You're there, Kevin. Okay, great. We can hear your voice.
Okay, great. I'll get going, Peter. Peter, it's great to see you virtually here. Juliet, great to see you and hear your voice as well. And it's really a joy to join you. I want to thank Karen and the Pestalozzi Trust for the invitation to come and participate. I had hoped to be there in person, but we have a family engagement tomorrow. My son is presenting his high school senior thesis and defending that in front of a panel tomorrow. So I'm home to be here for that. So a little bit about me. My name is Kevin Bowden. As I've said, I'm a staff attorney with the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and I'm also a home educating dad, married to Wendy. We have 8 children. Our oldest just graduated from college, university a few months ago, and our youngest at home is 5, and our oldest at home is 18, and so we'll have a high school graduate here in just about a month. So we are in the thick and the thin and the good days and the bad days of home education, just like many of you. I do cover a handful of states here in the United States. We do work very similar to what Peter mentioned with HSLDA Canada in terms of advocating for homeschool freedom across the country, and I'll get into more of that here in a little bit. And then I'm also blessed to handle HSLDA International, which is where we do what we can from our little foxhole here to help advance homeschool freedom around the globe. And there are many battles to be fought, as Juliet highlighted one very significant and very critical battle there in the UK. I'll start with something Peter touched on, which is one of the reasons that one of the main issues that I think we deal with, and that is one of worldview or ideology. And I actually think that this is the dominant battle that is out there. And there are, in fact, as I have looked at this, not for a long time, but for a relatively short period of time, but fairly in depth, there are just fundamentally opposed views of the family, of children, of education, and it plays itself out in this sphere of what is the home like? What should public schooling be like? Your president there, when he signed the BELA bill a few months ago, I mean, his worldview played into that, this long process of this bill coming into fruition in South Africa was driven by a worldview. And I think the dominant worldview today regarding education is that it is the role of the state, that the people in charge of a child's education and upbringing and learning is the government. It's the state, it's the country, it's the leaders, it's the policymakers, and it's the professionals. And the minority view is the one that I hold, and the one that I think I share with Juliet and Peter and most of you, which is that no, the role of the parent is fundamental and paramount and actually superior to the role of the state in the education of children. So if you hold a parental rights view, if you hold a family education view, if you hold a home education view, just keep in mind that you are in the minority across the world with respect to how you view education. And Juliet's contrast with the Children's Wellbeing in Schools bill in the UK is a great example of that. You see this worldview play out. And Juliet had a very nice little balance there, right, with the state and the parent, and how do we look at this? Another way to look at it, which I think through in my own mind, is kind of a game of tug of war. I don't know if any of you played that as a kid, or your kids play that, where you line up on different sides of a rope and you have to pull it one direction or the other. And the reason I like this is, the title of the talk here, right, is Home Education Advancing or Retreating Globally? And the answer to that question is the perennial yes. Yes, it's advancing and it's retreating, and there's constant tension between the two. And so I like the idea of the tug of war because it represents that there's always two worldviews, at least two, that are at stake in this battle for home education. There's the view of the state, which would love to pull people more and more into school attendance, into public education, and away from the home, away from the family, away from their parents. And then there's a view on the other end that would love to see the parents and the family be primary and central and highest in their children's education. So these worldviews are constantly at odds, as I see it. There's just constant friction that we see between these two. So let me just give a couple of examples of where I see this worldview playing out. I'll start with the U.S. and then I'll move to a couple of places around the world. So in the United States, some I know look at the U.S. and they see just 50 states of homeschool freedom and life is great. We have lots of freedoms here, and we just kind of are on a roller coaster and we just let things go and we don't really have to do much. And the reality is that it's actually very different. We have faced significant battles, even this particular year in the last couple months. In fact, one right now in the state of Illinois, there is a legislator with a worldview, a government representative who doesn't like homeschooling. And so she's introduced a bill that we are fighting and fighting and fighting. And I know, let me just draw some comparisons to the home education community's involvement in the public process in the BELA bill. I know that many of you wrote letters, many of you showed up to go to the public hearings, and it seems like your voices are ignored. And it's, the public shows up, they advocate for home education. They're by far the loudest voice there in terms of the public, and they seem to be shut down. So let me give you an example. If you feel that way, we have that here in the state of Illinois. There was a hearing just last week, and 47,000 witness slips from homeschoolers opposing this legislation, just like you guys opposed the bill there. In opposition, 47,000 plus, less than 400 in support of the bill. So 47,000 to 400. And what does the committee do? They pass the bill. Because I think it's not actually what we think the people want. It's not actually what is maybe best for the children or the family. It's driven by a view of children and a view of education that is at odds with many, many people. So those same battles that y'all are fighting there are being fought throughout the world, and we're fighting currently right here, right now. This bill, for example, would allow for mandatory home visits for homeschooling families. It's a bit unthinkable for many of us in the U.S. that would come to it. And I know Juliet and the Wellbeing in Schools bill is looking at these same sorts of state intrusion into the family. And so we see this worldview at stake. across the world, and even right here in one of our states in Illinois, where this bill is making its way through the legislature over the opposition of tens of thousands of homeschool parents in the state who do not support it. I could tell you of other battles, which I won't just for time's sake, but in Virginia in the United States, in West Virginia. So those are some of the retreating. But what about advancing? When I mentioned this kind of constant tension, right? On the one hand, it's retreating, and on the other hand, it's advancing. And the state of Utah, they got rid of any assessment in Utah tells the government what they're doing anymore. That's a great victory. So one country, two different states, homeschooling is both advancing in the one and retreating in the other. And we see this tug of war playing itself out between different worldviews and what it looks like on the ground level. Some of you may know of Brazil or have heard of some of the situations there. It's the same. There are hundreds of families, thousands of families actually, that are in some form of the state process to be prosecuted or have child or social services on their door. And the other day, I get a notification that a family lost the battle, was ordered to pay a fine, and was ordered to enroll their children in public school. And then not long after, the next day, I get a text from another individual in Brazil, in another state in Brazil, in a different state in the country, and that had lost their case at the trial level and had appealed that and had won on appeal. So again, we see this tension at work between the advancement of home education and the retreat of home education. Many of you may know of France, where they passed a very restrictive home education law that Peter alluded to back in 2021. And what do we see there? Well, we see a huge restriction on home education in France. And yet just a couple of months ago, a case that HSLDA supported for a family there, we won that case at the Court of Appeals, and the family was allowed to homeschool. And so we see this tension between the statist view of opposing homeschooling and everything with the state, and yet a victory, an advancement for home education in the judicial sphere in France. Romania is another state, another country in Europe where there's very interesting things taking place in the home education sphere. And then all through Latin America. I just had a call yesterday with a homeschool leader in a country in Latin America, and she gets calls from all over the region. She told me just within the last week, she's gotten calls from families in Brazil, families in Chile, families in Uruguay, families in Venezuela, and families in Argentina who are looking for help and support for the battles that they're facing in those countries. And so I look at this, and what it does for me, and I hope it may do for you as well, is encourage you that we must continue to stand up for the rights of parents to educate their children, and not just that, for the rights of a child to be taught by their parents. It's both and. There's lots of this, oh, what about the rights of the child? What about the rights of the child? Well, the reality is someone has to make a decision on behalf of the 5-year-old. And it's probably not going to be the 5-year-old. And one worldview says, you know what? We should make a decision for the child. The state should do that. We know best. We're professionals. We're government officials. We're elected. We know best. And the other view says, you know what? We understand that the 5-year-old needs help, but we think the parents are best positioned to make that decision on behalf of the child. And so that's the tension that we see literally all over the world. When I talk to folks, this is the constant battle, and I'm not sure that there's a country that's necessarily immune to it. And I want to touch on something that Peter mentioned also, which is, why should I particularly care? I mean, why should the global community be aligned in this effort? Why should Kevin Bowden or Peter Stock or Juliet have an interest in South Africa? Juliet's got a special connection, so she can certainly has an interest there. But why should we care? And the first reason that I care, as Peter mentioned, is simply because I want families and children to be well educated and be together. I think the family is the natural unit of any society, of any community, and it's the building block of any strong society and community moving forward. So I want that to be as strong as it can possibly be. And one of the greatest attacks on the family we see today, in my opinion, is this compulsory education, where education equals school attendance. And so to break down this narrative that says, no, education actually doesn't mean school attendance. It means what the word means, which is education. And we can have education in a variety of of settings. The other thing is that it is very increasing the global community, as Peter mentioned. And I'll just highlight one example. Just a couple of days ago, there's an international teachers union called Education International. They're very powerful. They're massive with millions and millions of people. They have lots and lots of money. And the National Educators Association in the US and the American Federation of Teachers in the US, the two biggest teachers unions in the United States, are aligned with Education International. And just recently, just 2 days ago, I think it was March 26th, they put out kind of a joint condemnation of the Trump administration. Now, I'm not making a political statement here. My only commentary, and the reason I bring this up, is to say that we are aligned as a global community. It's not just sufficient to say, well, what happens in France doesn't affect us in the United States. What happens in South Africa doesn't affect us in the United States. If the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill passes in the UK, it doesn't affect us in the United States. It very much does affect us. And what we do in the United States, I think, has reverberations around the world as well. If a negative homeschool bill were to pass in a state in the US, I think groups like Education International, groups like the Labour Party, groups like the government in South Africa could look at that and say, hey, even in the United States, they think regulation's appropriate. Even where homeschooling flourishes, where there's millions and millions of children, they think that the government should have their fingers in the homes of homeschool families, and they should be subject to a mandatory reporter. So this is a two-way street. And so we fight and we battle, not just because we love the global community that we do, but because I know that the battle that we fight here in the United States actually matters to the community. And the battles that you fight and that Juliet fights and that Peter fights matter for my own freedoms here, for my own family. And I take a pretty long-term view of this. When I look at this and I consider, it can be easy to get discouraged, at least for me. I can't speak for anybody else, but it can be easy to get discouraged to say, is this going to do anything? I mean, when 47,000 people testify in opposition to a bill and 400 in support and it passes anyways, or when thousands of you show up for a public participation hearing with government officials in South Africa, and they just ignore you and pass the bill anyways, it can be easy to say, it's discouraging. Why would I keep fighting? Why would I keep doing this? And I'll tell you what keeps me going just personally as Kevin is I've got 8 kids. And I hope that those kids, by God's grace, grow up and get married and have kids of their own. And I asked myself, Kevin, what are you doing from the position that you have, the very small position that you've been given, to ensure that if your kids want to educate your grandkids at home, that they have the freedom to do that? Will you do your part to ensure not just that you have freedom, but that your grandkids have the freedoms that you enjoy right now? Or, I would hope, even greater freedoms, that they would live in a world where home education is even more recognized, more celebrated, and freer than it is for us right now. So that's what motivates me to continue to move forward. So I'll just close very briefly with a handful of things that I think every parent can do. Some of us have spheres of influence that are bigger than others. Peter's the president of HSLDA Canada. Julia runs organizations in the UK. I'm one guy in West Virginia with a little bit of authority over a very small handful of things. But one thing that every family can do is you can educate your own kids well. And I think that's a great testament to the homeschool community. So if you're a mom or you're a dad, educate your own children well at home if that's what you're doing. And do the best job that you possibly can. Don't give anyone any reason to say homeschool kids are not educated well. So do our part to be exemplary in how we educate our own kids. The other thing is encourage others. Whatever influential sphere you have, encourage others in that sphere of influence. Whether it's a mom or dad down the road, whether you're a community leader, whether you lead a country movement, whether you host conferences, or whether you're the president of an organization, encourage others in your circle of influence to do the best that they possibly can. And finally, which I think is what we're all doing here, is be willing to take a stand. There's lots and lots of home educators across the world that have very, very unpopular opinions. And it can be easy to want to hide. It can be easy to want to retreat. And I just want to encourage you to take a stand in your community. I know many of you are doing that. Hopefully this is a bit of preaching to the choir, But be encouraged by those around you. Be encouraged by this Freedom Conference, that there are many, many people who think like you, who want to support you, and are taking a stand right alongside you. So in closing, as I look at this, whether home education is advancing or retreating worldwide, yes, it's advancing and it's retreating at the same time all over the world. But we can do our part, we can encourage others, and we can take a stand in whatever situation we find ourselves. So I'll close there, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. All right. All right, so Juliet and Kevin, stick around because we have time for some questions. I'm going to start with the audience if there's somebody who has one. We've also had questions from people online, so I'll alternate and we'll take a little bit of time to try and answer. We'll try and squeeze in as many as we can. I see a hand over here. Can we get a microphone over here, please? This question's clearly not directed at me.
This question is for Juliet, actually. Is she still there?
Yep.
Okay, hi, Juliet. I just loved how you were telling us about you guys collecting stories that you were sharing. I wondered if you could just elaborate on that a little bit more, because I believe that that positive approach could be tremendously impactful with the right, if it gets to the right ears, especially if you have that kind of mass and those kinds of numbers. Could you tell us more about what's happening in that?
Yes, so one of the people that I work with, one of the initiatives I'm involved in is an alliance of sort of leading figures in the home educating community in South Africa. And we've got a fairly loose alliance where we encourage each other to do what we're good at and support one another, but also, we're working on our own projects. And one of my colleagues in that is a lady by the name of Jen Hodge. And Jen has a website called Doing Education Differently. I think the web, I think it's just a .co.uk, doingeducationdifferently.co.uk. And she volunteered to use her website to collect stories along the lines of the Everyone's Invited campaign, if you can remember that. Because we felt like there are so many stories, I feel like particularly in the UK, the school system is really, really not working for so many children. And even those who manage to stay in the system, there are just so many negative stories. So we wanted to collect those because we need to shut down that rhetoric that says, oh, we need all children in school because we want all children to have a world-class education. So one of our points of attack is to show that this is not a world-class education and that how many children are being failed by that system. So she set up one page which is collecting those stories. So stories of bullying or not being heard or, just the difficulties that children are being facing, special educational needs children who are going through tribunals and still not being heard, being taken to court and still not being heard. So that she's got one page to collect those stories. Then we've got another page which is called The Child's Voice. And that is just for any child who wants to share their experience. And we've had a lot of home educated children put their stories of why they're so happy to be home educated and what a difference it's made in their lives. And then our third collection is Home Ed Alumni. So all those young people who have been through home education and are now adults, and it's very brief. It's a first name, a photograph, and a statement of what home education meant to them. So we have those three different kinds of stories that we're collecting at the moment. So whenever we're seeing people share experiences, for instance, on Facebook, we'll be popping underneath there, please go and share your story. And the idea is we really need thousands of them. We're not there yet. But if we get enough of them and we can point MPs and lords to those stories, they can go and see for themselves just what the problems are. And it's all in one place. So they can go and read those stories. So that's the idea behind that. And you can go and see those stories on doingeducationdifferently.co.uk on that website.
Thank you, Juliet. Okay, I've got a couple of online questions here. One is for Juliet, one is for Kevin. First of all, Kevin, are there some states where registration is required? Within those states, would there be a large, or is there potentially a large group of unregistered homeschoolers? And what is your experience with prosecutions for those who fail to register? So that's for you, Kevin. And then Juliet, a similar question. In England and Wales, is registration required? If not, why not? And is this changing? Maybe, Kevin, I could start with you.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the question. You know, there's lots of different laws in the US, so I won't go into all of them. But there are some where you just notify the state. So it's really kind of a mixed bag in terms of what that registration looks like. We have a trend towards not registering kids. So that would probably be the movement is towards deregulation and not towards increasing regulation. The state that I mentioned, Utah, was one of those states that went from a registration state to a non-registration state. And so currently we have 12 where there's no notification requirement at all. So the general consensus in the US is that the numbers of kids is undercounted. So I can't speak to whether, you know, in a notice state, for example, where I live in West Virginia, I can't speak to whether there are a lot of families or a few families that don't file a notice because they don't want to. But what I can say is there are a lot of states where it's just not necessary, and so there's very little ways for a public official to know exactly how many children there are that are homeschooled. With respect to the prosecution question, the answer is yes, families are prosecuted if they don't follow the law, and we encourage families to follow the law. Some families don't, you know, they don't like it. They're like, I don't agree with the law. I don't think I should have to tell the government, you know, information. And we say, yes, we agree with you that we don't think you should have to. But obviously, as a lawyer, it's very challenging for me to advise somebody not to comply with the law. That is, although you don't like it, I can't point to anything that says it's a law that you should disregard. I would say that the majority of time we can resolve these without court action. So even if a prosecution case is filed against a family, usually we can intervene and get it resolved outside of court. And but not always. You know, we still do have many prosecutions in the country. Probably a fairly very, very small number relative to the number of kids that are homeschooled. So I don't want to make you think that it's a big number. And sometimes it's driven by a paperwork problem. Sometimes it's driven by a lack of knowledge of the law. And sometimes it's driven by public officials that just don't like homeschooling. And if they have an inch, right, I didn't file a notice or I didn't file an assessment by the required deadline, I'm going to sue the family and try to withdraw their right to homeschool because they missed some technicality. We do see that. By and large, we're successful in our defenses, but it just highlights the need for constant vigilance and that we never just let our guard down, and we always have to be paying attention and push back whenever there's opposition to home education. So hopefully that's at least a reasonable answer to try to cover 50 states with 50 different laws.
Okay, so I guess I need to answer that one, which is about a register in the UK. Well, in Wales and in England at the moment, you don't need permission to home educate unless your child is in a special needs school, in which case you have to get consent from the local authority. In Scotland, I'll just mention you do have to get permission from the local authority, but the Scottish guidance, their most recent guidance, is fabulous, and they are so hands-off and so respectful that, you know, one doesn't mind quite so much if you know you can trust your local authority. So in the UK, you do not need to tell anybody if you're home educating. So when we arrived in the UK, we didn't need to tell anybody. But what does happen is that if a child is in school, the parent gives the school an instruction to remove the child from the school register. So because the parent is seen as being in charge of education and is responsible for education, it is an instruction, not a request. A lot of schools try to make out that it is a request, and then we have to send them letters and put them back in their box. So then the process on that is that the school then has to notify the local authority such and such child has been removed from our role to be home educated, and the local authority are then triggered to follow up and make contact with that family. So they don't have a right to sort of inspect, they don't have a right to home visits or telephone calls. The parent can respond to their inquiries in any way they see fit. Most of us don't choose to do it through interpretive dance. The preferred form is to send a report. So that way you have keep a trail or a paper trail of all your communications, which protects actually both parties. If a local authority becomes aware of a family that are not on their books, so to speak, they can also make informal inquiries. The law currently states that it is the duty of the local authority to establish, to identify children who are not in receipt of a suitable education. So by that definition, if the child is in receipt of a suitable education, should be going bye-bye and move on. But that doesn't always happen. You asked, I think the question was, if we don't have a register, why don't we have a register? And that is because the current law puts the responsibility for education on the parent. So school is more of an opt-in than the default. Although a lot of people, assume that it's default. This is potentially due to change under the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill, which is calling for a children not in school register. And then they say it's to find all the children that are missing education, that are falling through the cracks. But we know that it's not going to achieve that. What it will achieve is putting a whole lot of law-abiding people on the radar of the local authority and taking time away from perhaps those children who need it the most.
Thank you, Juliet. Do we have another question from the audience? I've got some more up here from people who applied online, but if I see one, I'll take one now. Anyone? No? Okay. So this one is a slightly more lengthy question, and it's this. So this has a South African focus. So following the Bella Bill coming into force, a large number of homeschoolers registered. There were a few issues in different provinces with officials trying to enforce old policies, their own interpretations of the law, etc. But in the main, the process at least has gone relatively smoothly. Some are saying they're dealing with officials they trust and who seem to understand their situation. The question to the panel is this. While this, of course, is a positive thing, relying on the goodwill of officials, is this enough? Juliet and Kevin, what do you think? I might have a little perspective as well, but let's hear from you. Juliet first, maybe?
Yeah, I just think one of the most important things as a home educator, one of the first things you need to be doing is familiarizing yourself with the laws of the country on home education, because it's not enough to hear from other people what the law is, what they think the law is. Sometimes I see conversations where people are speculating what the law is. And this is not widely known, but I actually currently work for our local authority. And some of my colleagues do work with home educators. And I know that sometimes these people don't fully know the law themselves. So it is for us as home educators to make sure we know the law, so that if you do get a call, if you feel like whoever your municipality, authority, council, if they are asking something that is not lawful, my favorite thing is to say, well, could you please point out to me where it says that? And send them to go and find it so that they can defend their position, because if it's not in the law, they're not going to find it. I think in the UK, certainly if we could trust all our local authorities to be respectful and to observe sort of just sensible approach to privacy, I think that one doesn't mind quite so much if there is some kind of a register or form of notification. But we have local authorities here that where their actual stated agenda is to get children back in school. So then that they are not there to support you, they're not there to help you. And so you are automatically on the defensive. It's going to impact how you report back. So I think the goal would be to try and have your local authorities trained to be respectful, to observe the law, and to actually support and to have some positive perspective on home education, not see it as a negative thing.
Yeah, I would. I would echo a lot of that, Juliet. And in terms of knowing the law, and if you know the law and you're dealing with an official, even that has goodwill, you can demonstrate that you know what you're talking about, and that you won't be easily pushed over by somebody. I cannot tell you, like Juliet, how many times I deal with a government official or a social worker who simply doesn't know what the law is, and even somebody with goodwill. I would say the question was kind of how do you deal with people that are goodwill, and the way I would answer that is that might change the tone of the approach or the manner of the approach, but it will not change whether I would encourage a family or allow them to do something that's not required by law. So we might do it in a different manner because there's not antagonism towards home education, but I still would not give an inch. And I would if they ask for something, for example, that's not required, and this is common, a social worker would show up and say, well, I need to come in the person's home, and I have a right to come in their home and look at it. And I say the same thing that Juliet says, which is, that's very interesting because we have the Fourth Amendment in the United States. And so I'm curious what law gives you this right. Could you point that out to me so that I can have that? And usually what they have, even the goodwill person, even the one who's not antagonistic, what they have is a checklist or a standard operating procedure or the local authority standard guidance that they're supposed to follow, which is just an internal policy. There's no law behind it. So for the individual who is in goodwill, I would say still be very educated about the law and the rights that you have. And if there's someone that's goodwill, then you're probably having a more good-natured discussion about, well, this is my understanding of it, as opposed to a more firm, no, you can't do it, or and I do this all the time. Sometimes I'll make a phone call and I'll have a discussion. Sometimes I'll write a very formal, forthright, assertive memorandum to the official, depending on whether I sense that there's any goodwill or whether there's lots of antagonism. So it's going to change your approach to the person, but not necessarily what you would do or not do in a particular circumstance. So that's how I would answer that.
If I can add to that, is that we find some people will say, "Oh, but she was so lovely," and so we were just happy to show off everything we're doing, and we always say, "Well, that's really nice that you had a lovely person, but she may leave, and then you may have somebody else come in, but you've allowed a precedent, and when you allow a precedent, something that is not in law, you actually set the tone for everyone around you." Because we get local authorities saying, "Oh, but we've got this many families that don't mind when we come and visit them at home." And that is not the point. The point is that legally there's no right to do it, but you can change what the approach is of your local authority by what you allow. And so you have to draw that boundary line quite firmly and try and encourage everyone to hold that boundary line very firmly. It's a very tricky one, and we battle with it here because we can't get everyone to be consistent.
Okay, thank you both. I'll just add my own minor comment on the end here, and that is that, yes, in Canada we do have some provinces where there is oversight from a provincial Ministry of Education, and so there are bureaucrats who literally liaise with families, and maybe the families have to report on some sort of regular basis, whether it's just once a year or maybe 2 or 3 times a year, on the progress of their child and so on. And there may be forms they fill out and so on. So there is some interaction between the provincial liaison and the family. And it's certainly the case in some of those provinces that folks who work in those jobs in the bureaucracy are friendly. And some of them have even homeschooled themselves, that homeschooled their own children. But at the end of the day, we need to remember that government is not your friend. And as wonderful as some of the bureaucrats may be, at the end of the day, they're not accountable directly to you. They're not your friend, literally. They're accountable to somebody else, and they're accountable to a system that demands certain things of them. Sometimes those things are going to be neutral, and sometimes those things could be hostile to your goals and objectives. So we tend to advise, as Kevin was saying, yes, obey the law. If you're required to submit a report, submit a report. But don't embellish. Give the minimum required and, do it honestly and respectfully. But don't go beyond that. And don't prolong the conversation. If you have to report, you have to report. But just remember that at the end of the day, there can be negative consequences from interacting with government. So hopefully that answers the question that the individual posed online. We're just about out of time, so I want to give both Juliet and Kevin a minute, just a minute, 1 minute, 60 seconds only, to sort of summarize anything they'd like to say, and we'll close off after that. Let's start with Juliet.
You've put me on the spot here. I just think, this whole thing of knowledge is power. That is just really probably the biggest takeaway, is that we need to inform ourselves and inform others. Home education is such a positive thing. We shouldn't be hiding it. This is a light that we want to share with others. And there's lots of ways we can do that. Wouldn't have enough time now to talk about that, but I'm available if you need to get in touch with me. I know that Karen van Oostrom can connect you with me, but we also run a conference in May, so people can, mind you, no, we're not online this year, sorry, so you can't attend. But anyway, just get in touch.
Thank you, Juliet. Kevin.
Yeah, I would just close with an encouragement to not grow weary. It can be very easy for a homeschool mom or dad to grow weary in their own homeschooling because it's hard work. I mean, homeschooling is not easy. It takes effort. And sometimes it's easier to look at a different educational model and say, you know what, I'm going to do that. So don't grow weary in your own home education journey. And then secondarily, don't grow weary in fighting for freedom. Don't grow weary in advocating. Don't go weary on behalf of your kids, and partner with folks like the Pestalozzi Trust. And so if I just had 3 words, it would simply be don't grow weary.
Thank you, Kevin. Well, as the chair of the panel, I get the last word. And so there are 2 things I want to say very, very briefly. For those who are interested in learning more about the Global Home Education Exchange, there's a website. It's ghex.world. Okay, ghex.world. And there's a lot of great content on there from past conferences. So you can actually watch videos or just listen to them if you prefer to listen on a wide variety of subjects, including some of the ones we've been talking about here today, but many others as well. So I'd encourage you to check that out if you have any interest. And the final point I'll make is that it's this. We all hang together or we hang separately. Do you know that expression? Okay, so what I would encourage those in the audience here and those watching online to do is join the Pestalozzi Trust. We need to be together. We can't win every battle necessarily, but we will surely lose every battle if we are not united in working together. And the Pestalozzi Trust is the organization that's going to represent home educators well, already does represent home educators well, and fight the battles that need to be fought here. The trust is looking at the legal action, taking the legal action to challenge the Bella Bill. It needs your support. It can't do it alone. We face this in Canada too. Families who have to challenge a government agency by themselves find the cost exorbitant. You can imagine the cost of a lawyer hour after hour, day after day. But together, that cost is very modest. So again, if you're not a member currently, you need to join. I'll leave us on that note. I want to thank our panelists, Kevin Bowden, Juliet English, and that concludes today's proceedings, and we'll see you tomorrow morning.